Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Consent Dojo. I've been at this for a few years now. I am your host, Midori, and this is this fantastic opportunity where I get to invite amazing people that I have in my life to talk about their perspective in their experiences and expertise around the nuanced, complicated, exciting, uh, infuriating, frustrating, joyous, all of that that has to do with, well, being a good human. Because consent's really all about being a good human. It first started off with a kink company asked me to teach consent. I don't feel like I can teach consent because
Mhm.
it is such a giant, multifaceted beast. But what do I have? I have amazing friends. So I get to be ignorant on people's uh, expertise and fields. I kind of fancy myself maybe a Terry Gross, if only. So, and I call it Consent Dojo because, like martial arts and various training, which Cecilia's familiar with, you need constant training. And some of the simplest skills may be the most profound skills as well. So, yeah, it's about building our consent muscle. And I would like to introduce to you the amazing Cecilia Tan. Let me do the reading the official bio thing, and then I will spill the tea. So, officially, about Cecilia. For over 30 years, really? Has it been that long? Cecilia Tan has been writing erotic fiction and promoting BDSM community activism and education. The author of Telepath Don't Need Safe Words, Slow Surrender, The Prince's Boy, and many, 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 did I say many? Other works of BDSM erotica. She was also the founder of Circlet Press and creator of the amazing Fetish Fair flea market. She retired from both to concentrate on her own writing in 2019. What a year! And has uh, taken home various honors, including the Romantic Times Pioneer Award and a National Leather Association Writing Award. A bigender, biracial, bisexual switch, Tan believes the brain is the body's biggest sex organ. She lives in the Boston area with her longtime poly primary partner, aka husband, and one cat. And check out the links, uh, ceciliatan.com, patreon.com/Cecilia Tan, Instagram.com/C Tan_writer. Okay, so now here's my part. Okay, this human being is my damned enabler. Okay, you are my enabler. So I love going to writers' retreats and hiding out at Cecilia's place. And they have, that household has like the best graphic novels, best tea, best food, and best deeply nerdy conversation. Um, I never leave the house because there is, I call it the house of compulsion. In my little guest room, suddenly a stack of graphic novels will show up. I never leave. It's great. Um, Also, fellow tea aficionado, and we have our addiction. So, um, and an amazing human being, one of my dearest friends, an amazing collaborator with Cecilia and Laura, who I recently featured in my Patreon, um, around DS and MS and what we can learn from in fiction or not from the Marketplace series. The three of us actually co-wrote the book, a three novella set called Silk Threads, which you have on your site in the
Um,
author's
I,
edition.
I think the author's edition, yes, I think, okay, CeciliaTan.com is a little bit of a mess right now because I started a renovation and haven't finished it, just like real life renovation, right? You think it's only going to take a certain amount of time, and it of course takes 10 times as much time and twice as much money. But my Shopify store should have it. I'll dig that link up if we need to.
Great, because
But
the three of us got together and wrote hot smut in in a fictional Japan. So check it out. And the author's edition is out. And with the author's edition, the
it's
author
illustrated.
illustrated with our favorite illustrations. And we also get the money.
Yes, yes, we make more when you buy it from us, and
Yes.
it's our let's call it our preferred edition.
It's a director's cut. Absolutely. Uh, and we often, in those long nights in the kitchen, talk about nature, kink, and consent. But since we are, uh, both in the world of personal fantasies and producing fantasies for others and teaching, and we've been around long enough to see trends change. So I asked about, hey, the nature of consent and how kink is represented in uh, fun, hot smut writing as well as general literature in the realm of fiction has changed over just our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And never mind going back into the turn of last century, but even in our lifetime, as we've been discussing more around consent and things that seemed hot and okay now is like cringeworthy. So how do fiction writers, I mean, once in a while I dabble in fiction because, the filthy back alleys of my mind, but this human being is truly a dedicated fiction and fantasy writer. Uh, you also write nonfiction, but your fiction's hella amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So as somebody who's also in the industry, having run a publishing company, also paying attention to what's happening in the industry. And yeah, I want to know about what's happening and shifts in the idea of consent. So, as a broad invitation, I asked you to discuss consent in the world of fantasy and fiction, as the pen as mighty as the whip, and what we have to learn from that. And is what we're fantasizing okay even, especially with all that's going on in the world? I welcome questions and conversations. Feel free to chat amongst yourself in the chat, ask questions. And for those of you who are watching this in recording, thanks for joining us, and make sure to check out both of our Patreons. But on that note, I know you got stuff to talk about, so tell us about consent in fiction.
All right. So first of all, to take your last question first, your fantasies are okay. And the number one thing I think that everyone needs to establish in order to have consent between themselves and other humans is you have to know the difference between fantasy and reality. And I think there are definitely people out there right now who do not know the difference between fantasy and reality. And some of the, if they did, I don't think the world would be in the political situation that we're in right now. Right? Uh, if we consider that ambition and human life are maybe a process of taking our fantasies and trying to make them reality, that's where I think the be a good human part has to come in, right? Because obviously there's a bunch of billionaires out there right now who are just trying to remake the whole world in the image that they think they want. And I think a lot of them just really need therapy, honestly. But anyway, not naming names, but seriously, guys, really. Yeah. Uh, let's not talk about that right now. But your fantasies are okay. Even the billionaires' fantasies are okay. You know, as long as you are aware of where your fantasies cross the line in real life. The way humans are wired is extremely complicated, right? We have a lot of desires. Sometimes we don't know why those desires turn us on. We don't know where they came from. Maybe we're never going to know exactly where they came from. Um, Accepting that they're there is probably better than constantly trying to police ourselves and shame ourselves because shame around sex has been used as a tool to control people, uh, you know, since time immemorial, and especially to control people who are marginalized, queer, women. Um, and obviously we are not here to just uphold the patriarchy. That is not okay. We are fighting for the liberation of all sentient beings, so that everyone can have their fantasies and, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Right. That's literally the basis of this country. And to me, that sounds like, liberty means liberation, and pursuit of happiness means, yes, you get to dream about what you dream about. And not necessarily let just society's judgments or religion or whatever, you know, force you to feel bad about it. So I'm not here to shame people for having rape fantasies, for having, you know, difficult fantasies of any kind. Our society puts a lot of judgments on things, and but inside your own mind is the one place where you should be safe, right? And then the that said, of course, fiction can have an extremely strong effect on people. In fact, fiction's the one tool that we found through cognitive science that actually creates empathy in humans for other humans.
Mhm.
Um, the difference between watching a news story, reading a nonfiction essay about something, or reading a fictional story about something, it's the fictional story that creates the actual feeling of empathy in a reader or a viewer. Um, and this concept goes all the way back into antiquity. I mean, the Greeks had the whole idea that the reason that you were supposed to write plays and tragedies and then you were supposed to go see them was because it humanized you, right? That tragedy is a literal humanizing force. By experiencing the negative emotions of sadness and loss and grief and all these things and anger and injustice through a play, you didn't have to be traumatized by it in your real life, such that then when it happens to you in your real life, you can't deal with it, right? And you could have empathy for the people around you rather than just becoming a monster and, have feeling the need to literally dominate everyone around you, right? So, that's what the Greek tragedies were supposed to do, was teach the ruling class how to be humans. It turns out now, I mean, we know through science that it actually works and that fiction is the one tool we have because when you are storytelling, when you are putting someone into a fictional story, your brain goes through it as if it's happening to you and not as if you're just looking at it happening to someone else. And it rewires you. So understanding that fiction is this extremely strong force, um, yeah, I don't get to just stand up here and say, oh, your fantasies are fine. And by the way, write whatever you want. I mean, you can write whatever you want, but there's the question of when you are sharing it with someone else, you're now in a relationship essentially with another person, right? The writer and the reader are in an asynchronous relationship where, you know, um, I don't get to necessarily hear from the people who have read the things of mine and find out whether it worked for them or not, or if they had a problem, right? The way that you do, and there's no way to do aftercare, right? If I'm writing a really powerful story and I send it out into the world, and you know, um, besides the fact it would be impractical for, I don't know, thousands of people to be calling me up and being like, "You messed me up, man," I mean, so just uh, so yeah, so please, yeah, please don't do that. In fact, but uh, the So the two things that are working in opposition then essentially in fiction are, this incredible ability to build empathy, this incredible ability to have the reader feel things, um, including extremely negative things, right? Um, and we're in a place in society where readers do feel like they want to be taken care of with the same care and thoughtfulness that they would experience in a real life relationship. Um, when you're especially when you're writing erotica or romance, where you're like, we are talking about matters of the heart. The purpose of a romance book is to make you feel things. I mean, really, yeah, it's to make you think, it's to make you this and that, but 100% it is to make you feel things. And it is the genre that where the feel has a capital F, right? That if people don't have the feels, your book has failed, right? And that's not true of every genre, every genre has its winning conditions and its purposes, but romance is there to make you feel. Erotica is there to make you feel. Erotica in particular is there to make you feel aroused, and then understanding that readers have complicated feelings around their own arousal, right? Because society puts so many judgments on us, so forth and so on, there will be people who will be like, oh my God, I'm so turned on, and now I don't know what to do with myself because now I feel bad, right? Because now I feel guilty. And it's like, okay, I can't help you with that part. I can only help you with with what I've put into the story to begin with, which is the care and thoughtfulness that I've tried to use to create a story that will result in more humans being liberated after it existed than did before, right? That's the bottom line for me. I One of the reasons I write a lot of science fiction, in particular, is because science fiction is ostensibly forward-looking, and science fiction often deals with issues of social change and societal change in the future. But the truism is that whenever you're writing about the future, really you're writing about your present, right? That any writer, science fiction writer who is like, I'm writing about the future, you're writing about your current present and what you think about it. And that's why you picked the future that you wrote, right? So it's just, yeah, so there's sort of a duty of care as far as I'm concerned for writers. And this is not the way writers were taught in, say, MFA programs of the mid 20th century. Um, you know, uh, I have I went and got an MFA in the 90s, so I've been through the through that world, the literary world of the mid 20th century, the post World War II world in particular, was a male dominated patriarchal genre that essentially believed that the highest form of communication was not to actually talk about your emotions. Because, I mean, we're talking about English language in particular, right? Because, of course, you had all these traumatized war veterans who came home, and of course, the British way is not to talk about your feelings anyway. And yeah, step up for lip and all. And so instead, you would not directly address your feelings. You would instead put in a beautiful passage about a horse trotting across an empty field or whatever, right? And then somehow we were supposed to magically divine by our common knowledge of the Bible and society and the canon and whatever that, oh, that's a reference to such and such passage in James Joyce and whatever. And now I should feel sad because whatever. Um, Literary fiction is the genre that believes it is not a genre. Um, but uh, but because I can give you a whole nother rant about that. And I'm not saying don't get an MFA, but I'm saying go into it with open eyes. But yeah, so the idea that the previous idea was that like the writer was an artiste, and you were not supposed to think about the audience. You were not supposed, like the artist is supposed to, like have some kind of like vision that is unique to them, and like they're never influenced by anything, and blah blah blah. But then on the other hand, you were supposed to know the whole literary canon, and you were supposed to assume that your readership also read the same literary canon as you, and so forth and so on. So and it's like, okay, so am I supposed to be not influenced by anybody, or am I supposed to be, like what? So yeah,
Writer's a storyteller.
yeah. So
Storytellers,
there
yeah.
was this idea that is, I think, not quite dead, but that somehow writers were supposed to create their art in a vacuum, and this a lot of arts have this, right? That you create this thing that is pure in some way, and
It's,
then critics and
it's,
readers go and read it and experience it and analyze it and whatever without thinking about you, right? Like that the author then was somehow separated from the work. And maybe we need a little more separation sometimes between the author and the work, but we entered the postmodern age, that those ideas have broken down a lot. And of course, now that we don't have as much patriarchal domination in fiction and in storytelling overall, that and we've got so many more voices that are not white post-war male, English speakers. I think the horizons are opening up a lot for people to realize, oh, that there are storytelling traditions that take the duty of care between the storyteller and the reader seriously, and that um, we can argue about whether we're doing it right or not, but at least acknowledging that the duty of care exists is something that, some previous English language literary traditions would not have said even exists. They're like, no, that's not your job as the artiste to, it's like, of course it is. My job is communication. Human beings are trying to communicate to human beings asynchronously through these scribbles on a page or on a screen. It's kind of a miracle that it works, honestly. So yeah, I know I'm going straight into people's minds. I'm I'm implanting, I'm incepting dreams for them and, so forth. So I take that very seriously. And what's happened over time in BDSM erotica in particular, if you look from, say, the 1980s until now, is like every decade we've moved a step closer to representing what actual kinky people do as a form of erotica versus what kinky people fantasize about as erotica, right? So, and th this is a huge change, right? So it used to be that if you read something that was kinky, quote unquote kinky fiction, you had an actual, I don't know, Arab sheik kidnap somebody, and take them off to their harem and, um, uh, right, like total non-consensuality, total non, whatever, and that you know,
Gore,
the
gore.
right, well, and like even in romance, right, in the like the 1970s bodice rippers, right? And but you have to remember that at that time, most of those women reading those and having those fantasies were uh essentially the only way you could get the heroine into a position where she could have sexual agency was first she has to get raped so that now she doesn't have a virginity to protect anymore. And now all of a sudden she can go from being a maiden to being, you know, the strong mother figure or the strong, adult woman figure essentially. And it's just like, so no, I don't think those are necessarily great books, but they were for their time really, really groundbreaking, right? They were being written by women for women. And they were essentially like the only way I can have all this hot sex with my heroine, but not have my readers be like, oh, but she's a slut now, we don't like her, is to have, this structure where she's kidnapped, forced to, forced to discover the carnal side of life. And then once she does, of course, she's the one who ends up taking over the relationship, right? And it's like, ultimately she comes out on top as far as the one who is in charge of the emotions, right? That's the classic arc of pattern. So, but even BDSM erotica of the time, not romance, but like the kind of pseudo Victorian, stuff or whatever. It just has a lot of, I don't know, like men running around spanking their maids and, this, that, and whatever, and the maids being like, oh, oh, oh,
The
and
the classic story of O.
right, well, yeah, right. And it's just like, although O is interesting because O kind of, is that plants that seed though, that there's uh that there is a sort of culture around it, that
Mhm.
it's not just this one kinky guy, right? And it's like, yeah,
Right.
but yeah, so by the 90s you started to have a a split between what I'll call classic fantasies, yeah, where someone is actually like sent off to be a slave or whatever, or there's a sent off to a slave planet, say like Gore, right? Where it's like this is the way it is in this society, and so forth and so on. And Gore was the alpha beta omega of its time, right? And uh the whole and then what I call scene aware erotica, which was coming up, where and again, written by women for the most part, and pioneered by an editor in England who editing and who remembers the Black Lace uh series of books. It was an imprint. They were mass market. You could buy them at Tower Records.
Yeah,
Um
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so a lot of the Black Lace ones were what was her name? Carrie. Oh my God, I'm completely blanking her last name. But she I'm not surprised some of you have some on your shelves. She was like, "Why does it always have to be somebody is just like kidnapped off and whatever and blah blah blah? And why can't we actually have kinky fantasies about the actual kinky people who we know exist? And so, where there are actual clubs where people go and they negotiate consent and they negotiate safe sex and they do, whatever." And it was like so you started to see that finally. Or things like the Marketplace, I mean, for that matter. I mean, Laura Antonou's Marketplace series, when that came along, one of the reasons it was so mind-blowing to people is they were just like, oh, there's so much negotiation that goes on in there, right? Where they're like, but a lot of it is that pre-negotiation where it's like you pre-negotiate, sign the contract, and then once you sign the contract, you feel duty bound to hold to the terms of it, right? And so if later you have, there are some of her best stories are about people who kind of regret what they did. They were like, well, maybe I should have just stuck with it as a hobby, or whatever, that kind of thing. But that's part of what makes them so fun and interesting, right? Is people constantly renegotiating with themselves, right? About like, why do I want this? Why does this satisfy me? What is the thing I'm doing? And I think that's a process that we go through. I mean, as kinky people, as we age, as we, whatever. So yeah, so two things stand in opposition. On the one hand, there's the I have my kinky fantasies. I'm writing fiction because I am hot and I want to get off, and these are my fantasies, and I want to share them with people because that's part of being a writer. And then there's the duty of care, of like, but how do I make sure I'm making less harm in the world versus creating more? That's
Mm.
that's the duty of care to me that it ultimately has to exist. And we can debate whether we're creating more harm or more good, right? And there are certainly still to this day, sort of anti-SM and anti-sex feminists who would say, no, 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 all pornography is bad, but they have been pretty well disproven, I think, too. I mean, just if you want to talk about science, the studies essentially show that when people are consuming more pornography, there's actually less violence. And it's like, um, yeah, funny that, it's like, gee, when people are getting their rocks off regularly, they're just not as frustrated and likely to lash out. I mean, and they want it to be the other way around, right? They really want it to be that, oh, pornography depraved you and then you went on a shooting spree. And it's like, guess what, guys? It's actually not like that at all. Yeah.
It's
So.
stuffing everything that can lead to that.
Mhm.
Oh, and speaking of Laura's books marketplace series. Recently, I had Laura on my Patreon talking about real life DS and fiction DS and some of the things that she's envisioned as rules in her fictional world that
Mhm.
she hasn't explicitly written. And so she
Mm.
reveals that in the video.
Mm.
I will put a link for that. Check it out over
I
in my
still need to
Patreon.
I
Yeah.
still need to watch that conversation
Oh, you
between
know
you.
it was a good
I
conversation.
know, I
Yeah.
know.
Are
Yeah,
you open
yeah,
are you
yeah.
open to a question, especially on
Sure.
the duty of care?
Mhm.
This applies. Someone asks, recently I wrote something that people who beta read it said it was difficult. How do you provide aftercare to your beta readers? Do you provide aftercare for beta readers?
I
Well,
do,
could you
although
explain beta readers to
okay, so
those who
so
are not
beta
familiar?
readers, when you're a writer, sometimes you have people who are a close circle of friends or other writers who you critique each other's work. You give feedback. It comes from like beta testing of software, where it's like, oh, can please play through this video game, and then let's find out where the bugs are and what worked and what didn't, right? So beta reading is basically, yeah. So it's you're not even maybe ready to send it to your editor or to publish it, obviously, yet, but you're gonna play test it on a couple of readers, right? And I tend to do like on a novel of mine, I'll usually have 12 beta readers and, maybe sometimes two groups of 12, because if it goes through a major revision, then I'm like, okay, well, now I need a fresh group to read it. And the first thing is that just like all negotiations, I usually warn them firsthand, to be like, okay, there's gonna be, I mean, the book that I have just got put up for pre-order today is called Bound by the Blood, and it's got BDSM, ritual sex, blood play, knife play, whatever. And some people are just not gonna vibe with blood play and knife play, right? And so there are some beta readers I know I'm not gonna send it to because I'm like, I'm first of all not gonna get good feedback out of them probably if they're just spending the whole time squicked, right? And some of the time, uh although sometimes I'm like, would you read this and let me know if you're, as somebody who's like afraid of blood and faints at the sight of it and whatever, whether this is too much or, that kind of thing. But then there would definitely be aftercare, which would be like, okay, if I really put an idea in your head that was way too much for you, let's talk about it. And or let's talk about what you should talk about with your therapist, that kind of a thing. I only just learned that if you're having intrusive thoughts, especially intrusive visuals, um, that playing a really intense 30 minutes of Tetris can actually have a therapeutic effect. I just learned this. Um, so it apparently works on both PTSD flashbacks and also like yeah, various kinds of intrusive thoughts where you're just like, "Oh my God, I can't get this idea out of my mind." And that happens to me when I watch the news sometimes where it's like I hear about something that is so horrible, I can't stop thinking about it. And it's like and it just keeps coming into your mind when you cannot stop it. That uh those are called intrusive thoughts and um yeah, and my I haven't tried it yet, but I have now read a couple of internet stories about it, and I haven't read the original paper yet, but I will eventually. About yeah, apparently it works. At least for some people. Obviously, everyone's brains are different, but that there's a way that the visual motions of the eyes and your fingers and whatever resets something in your brain um that blocks intrusive thoughts. I'm like, wow, I'm definitely trying that the next time I come up with something where I'm just like, oh God, I can't stop thinking about it. That's horrible. What happens to me sometimes is I come up with a thing that is so horrible that I can't get it out of my mind. And then I'm like, okay. And that's a sign usually that I'm terribly depressed or, otherwise in need of some form of mental health care myself. Um, and, it's hasn't happened a lot lately, but I think that's because I'm just in complete, since November, I've just been in maintenance mode, you know, like just trying to keep my head above water the whole time.
In terms
Uh,
of aftercaring your beta readers,
yeah.
what does that entail?
Well, so this is the thing is that I would say, can you tell me about can you tell me about what bothered you in a way that isn't going to feel more harmful to you, essentially? And um, I actually had not a beta reader, but a regular reader, um, essentially. I'll say this in particular, went in to read my fanfic, um, without being prepared for how much more out there fanfic is than professional fiction. And that, a lot of what is in the fanfic world, in particular, because it's not for publication, it's not for, for money, it is purely for self-expression purposes, um, are like I write a lot of dark, really dark fiction, in the fanfic space. I mean, things like it's Harry Potter, but Voldemort won the war and, and gives Harry to Lucius as a slave, right? That kind of a thing. And then of course there's magic. So there can be, all kinds of horrible things can happen and then we can heal you with the wave of the wand, and then we can do it all over again, right? That kind of a thing. And I had a reader who had met me at a convention and had read some of my regular fiction and, whatever and blah, 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 dive into my fanfic without, first of all, she didn't know how to read warnings on fanfics. Like fanfics, this is why the warnings are there, is to tell you that there are things. So she didn't know like she didn't really understand what non-consensual meant. Didn't really, I guess, I don't know. This person ignored all warning signs and, and dove headfirst into reading probably one of my absolute darkest Lucius Harry fics. And I got a screed in email from her essentially being like, I need you to denounce dark fanfic and promise you'll never do it again and blah 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 because I was so harmed. And I'm like, you read a story that you had the ability to stop reading at any time. So it was like there's a point at which we do have to encourage people to exercise self-care too, right? And I mean, I teach a class called Submissive Self-Safety. And nobody likes this, but I basically say, when you go into the dungeon and you're completely trussed up in bondage and, you're blindfolded and you've got a gag in your mouth and whatever, and the Dom is doing their Domly things and whatever, who's in charge of your safety? And everybody's like, the Dom. I'm like, no, you. You are still in charge of your safety. And everyone hates that answer. But the truth is that only you can be responsible for your own body and what's going on in your mind and what's going on in your interior, right? The fantasy is that the Dom is in charge and that the Dom will take care of us and that the Dom is, can read our mind, right? Telepaths don't need safe words, right? And that the Dom will somehow fix everything if anything goes wrong. But the truth is, only you are in charge of your own safety. And people absolutely hate it when I say that, but then I'm like, but I'm saying this after 30 years of experience of leaving a trail of brokenhearted doms behind, um, because it took me 25 years to realize, oh, it's because none of them were, it's not that none of them were good enough for me. They were all perfectly fine. They were all perfectly human beings. And my own inability to communicate my needs or uh, my issues or whatever, um, it took me 25 years to learn that, first of all, that I often go nonverbal when I'm submissive. And so if you've put me in a submissive headspace, I now have lost all ability to tell you that that was in fact too much, or that, so forth and so on. Um, and it was, it just, it took, you know, it took decades for me to figure this out. And people would be like, I wonder why she never called me again, and it would be like, didn't we have a great time? Like, we did have a great time. And then, but mentally, like emotionally, I would have moved on. And I didn't even really know what I was doing, which is not what this talk is about, but it's sort of, it's my basis for ultimately only you can prevent forest fires, right? Only you can protect your own psyche, right? And so if you read something that's really, really upsetting, and especially if it's one of my beta readers who's somebody I know, somebody I am colleagues with, or that I have read stuff for, so we have a kind of intimate relationship, right? It's like you want to, um, yeah, you want to try to come back to them and say, I'm sorry, did I not, first of all, did I not warn you adequately? If I didn't, I'm really sorry about that. Um,
I
or,
want to I
you
want to
know,
ask about warnings, but before that, I'm having an intrusive thought,
hmm, which is,
which is, and it's funny that you mentioned Smokey the Bear because what you said, only you. I had this image of Smokey the Bear, but with like a leather
in
harness
a leather harness.
saying,
So
only
did I.
you.
So
Oh,
did I. I gave you that image. I beamed it from my brain to
yeah.
yours.
So I have him in the sexy modern Smokey the Bear, not yeah,
But
with the
Smokey the Bear's buff, man. Have
oh
you know?
yeah, Smokey the Bear's like, ooh, daddy, right? So Smokey the Bear, ooh, daddy, Smokey the Bear, leather harness going, and with the
Right,
hat,
yeah, of course.
support national forests, national parks, going, only you can protect yourself. Like, ah,
Right.
I need that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
intrusive
Want to
thought.
make a t-shirt for me, please?
God, yeah. Oh my God. And
Yep.
only you can protect yourself, dot, 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 and forest fires and forests, right? Um, but about warnings, um,
Mhm.
s-
Okay,
you
so content warnings.
yeah.
So this is the thing. Like a lot of people are like, why aren't there more content warnings on fiction? Like when I pick up a book. And I have come all the way around on this issue. I used to say, no, there should not be content warnings on a book, because 100% if you put that warning label on it. So like when I was a kid, remember this is the explanation before the explanation, right? Do you remember when they started putting warning labels on rap albums? Right? And it would say warning explicit lyrics, and it was like, Jesus, it's a rap album. Of course it has explicit lyrics. I mean, I don't know. And then they started doing the other way where they would do a clean version just to sell in Walmart and that kind of thing, right? But as someone points out here, the thing about putting the warning label that said explicit lyrics on it was it made it more attractive for teenagers to go out and buy more of it. And the music industry was like, we're onto something, right? So, of course, then rap got just more and more extreme and, so forth and so on. And they sold more and more of it. Aside whether that was good for society or not, it was good that there was an art form that was, um, that the record companies were not completely in control of, right? It was kind of happening on its own, right? It was an organic thing. They didn't create this genre. This genre already existed, and they had been ignoring it until they realized how much money they could make from it, right? So fast forward to, let's say, the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and the erotica wars. So what had happened in erotica was we went from most of the erotica that was out there was being produced by men for men, and magazines like Penthouse, and it's literal millions of, okay, not literal, but many, many hundreds of copycat magazines, that were similar. um Visual porn, whatnot. Still a pretty male dominated industry, but written porn that you went into the bookstore to buy, um went through a kind of upscaling that was largely driven by feminism. It was driven by feminists like Joni Blank and Susie Bright and Carol Queen, and and a bevy of people, and Black Lace even, where there were essentially women writing, uh so we went through like the golden age of anthologies. So it started with erotica, where the Good Vibrations literally had, they had their own press, and they did these anthologies of short stories written by women for women that were just all over the map, of, erotic stories. And then you started to see ones like Michelle Slung's Slow Hand, or then the Best American Erotica series started, and whatnot. And it was all these, they were not mass market anymore. They were bigger size, beautiful looking covers, piled up in the fronts of Barnes and Noble and Borders. Um, and bookstores that had not had an erotica shelf before had to create one. Things like that, where you were just like, oh, okay. And this is the heyday of Circlet Press, right? So we were selling a lot of anthologies to places like Tower Records. I mean, so, and Cleus Press and some of the other presses started putting those warning labels onto their books, where they were like, warning, explicit content, and I was like, guys, you can't do that, because this is how they're going to censor us. The next thing, they're going to let it go up to a point, and then they're going to be like, oh, and now everything with an explicit warning label, we're not selling it anymore, right? And they're like, no, you don't understand. We sell twice as much of the books that we put the warning label on than the books that we don't. And I was like, I don't know. I still don't like it, because capitalism, it's like we're beholden to, if Barnes and Noble one day suddenly decides, oh, a shareholder got upset because we, whatever. At that time, there were shareholders for Barnes and Noble. I'm not sure there are anymore. Um, you know, it was like we could just be shit out of luck, right? If someone could suddenly decide that there was too much sex, drugs, and rock and roll at Tower, and to get rid of the sex, what we're going to do? We're just going to quit selling all these books with warning labels. And so I was very against it, because I was like, you're just going to give them a tool to oppress us with. But I have since come around, because of the duty of care, to think of it like food labels, right? And
Hmm.
it's like, you look up pick up a packaged cookie in the grocery store, and it tells you if it's got any of the allergens in it, right? Was it made in a factory where there's nuts? Are there eggs? Are there, whatever? Is there gluten? And it's like, because, yeah, people should know, right? And it shouldn't necessarily be a judgment on it, right? Or on the people. So, one of the things that has been hard to explain to people, because if they only know the term triggering from the internet, they don't really understand that that's something that's not just it made you mad, right? When you get triggered is when things are triggered, like you have intrusive thoughts, or you are triggered when you burst into tears in the middle of a business meeting where it is inappropriate to do so, so forth and so on. That, when you are triggered, you are having an outsized, non-consensual emotional reaction, that you do not want to be having at the time, right? And the one thing that the Me Too movement was supposed to be trying to teach people, although a lot of it has been drowned out, is that survivors of sexual assault in particular can be triggered by sexual content, and that's not their fault, right? Um, they they deserve to make the choice whether to go into a triggering situation or not, right? And so, and good God, so many movies, whatever, have a rape scene in them, and you're just like, why does this have a rape scene in it? Like how many action movies have you seen where the motivation of the hero is like up to the next level because then his the villain raped his girlfriend, right? Okay, actually we don't see it as often as we used to, but go back and just like watch action movies from the 90s and you're like, why is this scene here? What, and it was that whole thing of you could put a rape scene into a movie and get an R rating, but if you put a consensual sex scene in, you get an X rating. And so it's like, yeah. So Hollywood was like, well, if we're gonna have any sex and nudity in our thing, it has to be a rape scene. And so, they had a formula that's like, all right, there'll be a car chase, there'll be a fight, there'll be a rape, there'll be a blah blah blah, right? And it's like, man, so it's like it was just in the water, right? And you can you go back and watch some of those things now, and you're like, oh, interesting. Like, actually, movies are somewhat less rapey than they used to be, and it's because we're in the post Me Too era and enough people have kind of made the point that, you know what, maybe we didn't need that trope actually. Maybe our hero could be motivated by something else, that kind of a thing. And so, other things like, I don't know, like people who want to be warned whether a pet dies in yeah in the book or in the movie, right? And it's just like, so there are websites that you can go to, like Christian moms can go to websites where the movies have been rated by other Christian moms as to whether they're okay for their kids. Somebody was telling me about one where you can go and basically other pet owners will have rated the movies as to whether the pets are mistreated or are they okay, and whether they get a gold star. I'm like, okay, see, that's perfectly reasonable to me that somebody
Yeah, I
who,
think the line is "Don't kill the cat."
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's just like, yeah, it does, I think that what is the website is called something like The Dog Lives or something, but not that. Somebody can find it for me. I don't remember if it's a website or if it's a subreddit or something like that. But because I did not go down that rabbit hole. I was like, no, I have work to do. I didn't follow the I didn't follow that thread, but it exists out there. So it's like, okay, but the publishers don't want to they don't want to put too many warnings on either, because of course they're afraid that, if there are too many warnings, then people will be turned off and nobody will buy the book and whatever. So I'm like, what I've been part of the revamp of my website I've been going through is to add essentially doesthedogdie.com. Okay. I knew it was something like that. um and it's like adding essentially my own nutrition label to each of my works. And if I get the plugin working right, it'll be like you can scroll over it and a little thing will pop up. And if you don't want to see that, you can ignore it, right? Um, but because my work does interrogate consent, that is like the core story I think that I tell. Telepaths Don't Need Safe Words has a rape scene in it. I mean, it's like, but people kind of forget it because it's only one of the sex scenes in the story, and she essentially, you know, uh, she essentially gets revenge, right, on the villain, right? And it's like, so much happens in that story, and it's under 5,000 words. I still don't know how did I do that? I can't write that short anymore. But, um, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like, and the thing is, one of the reasons I say don't judge people for their fantasies or don't, is that people are as turned on by the rape scene in there as they are by the consensual scenes in there. And that's on purpose. Like yeah. Um, and yes, there's some question about whether it's okay or not and whatnot. There's a little bit of questioning of the consent in the situation and whatnot, but there's a point at which it is withdrawn and and this is why she gets to non-consensually beat him to a pulp later. But which is I'm like, this is the fantasy wish fulfillment part of this is that, you know, your your rapist or your, whatever who didn't respect your no gets their comeuppance, and you know, um and she doesn't kill him, she just beats the hell out of him. So, mm, that's my fantasy, right? Is that you would get to just smash in the face of whoever it was that did that to you, right?
So
Uh,
one of my many favorite, one of the many's favorite operas of mine, uh,
mm,
is Don Giovanni,
mm,
and that is straight up a uh, rapist who, in the third act, gets dragged to hell because there's a
mm,
woman following him around going, bad guy, bad guy, bad guy. And then finally, he's dragged to hell. It's
uh-huh,
satisfying.
hmm. So, so yeah. Um, we live in a world right now though where they want to have the right, they meaning, the current regime of the US government and, and many others essentially want the right to say all pornography is illegal.
Mhm.
If you write pornography, you should be put in jail. Um, if you But we need to be clear that the reason they want this right is because they want to be able to label anything they want as pornography so they can stop you from publishing it or spreading it, right? So they're right, and they've come right out and said this. It's not a secret, right? It's right on page 1 of Project 2025. It not only says that pornographers should be jailed, it also says, and by the way, we consider anything that has trans or queer characters in it to be pornography. Like just the existence of these characters is pornographic to us. So you may as well actually be doing actual pornography with actual sex and actual, right? Um, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you are exercising your duty of care and labeling it properly so that you know, uh, you're not running your readers into situations that they don't want to be in, right? Um, yeah, it's a hairy world right now. But that said, right, the yeah, are there taboo fantasies out there that like we shouldn't be exploring? I don't know. This is the thing. I Part of me wants to say that however you're wired, whatever it is that turns you on, there should be a way to exercise your muscles or whatever it is. I mean, such that you can get off without harming actual human beings or animals, right? Um, that, yeah. And this is what, the people who are trying to sort of reestablish this, fantasy patriarchy of theirs, where they want to be able to marry their 12-year-old female cousin, um, that kind of thing. It's like they don't want this world of open consent where negotiation takes place as part of it to exist because they just want to be in control of it. They want to say these are the rules and they benefit me only, and that's the way it is, right? And that's obviously not the world I want. So yeah, 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 yeah. So have we, I keep getting asked, like, have we gone too far? Like, is there too much labeling? Is there too much, whatever? And I don't think there is. Um, uh, Among other things, that one of the reasons I think there is not too much labeling is because if there was too much labeling, it would be hurting sales, right? If there was too much labeling, you would see, yeah, people would be like, oh, I'm not going to read any books at all because obviously there's too much bad stuff in them. And it's like, and nobody's saying that.
I like
Book
your
sales are up, and erotic book sales are up, and romance book sales are up. And the more labeling we do, the more people are like, oh, and now I know I can safely go into these waters, or at least I'm prepared to go into these waters,
I like
Um,
your idea and analogy towards ingredients list because okay, so like when I'm a big audiobook person. And
mm,
when I'm searching, it's not just the warning, but if I'm in the mood for something a little more optimistic after I've
Mm,
gone, you know, I want a little thing that says, and I think in like Audibles I can see like uplifting or
mm, mhm.
space opera or um so then I go to Becky Chambers stuff. Uh
Right.
yeah.
Oh, I love Becky Chambers.
Oh, okay. So for those of y'all who don't know Becky Chambers' work and want something like science fiction that is not entirely apocalyptic, it's adorable.
We
Sometimes
just
I
did her.
get to
Yeah.
uplift, and sometimes,
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't, yeah, the ingredients list, right?
Yeah.
I,
Exactly.
I'm
Let
in
people
the mood
make an
for,
informed choice,
I'm in the
right?
mood for dessert, or I'm in the mood for really, really intense Szechuan something.
Right, right, right. And the thing is, people have different levels of tolerance for spoilers, right? Some people are like, one of my assistants literally reads the last chapter first and then, doesn't know any of the characters, doesn't know anything yet, but, reads like the last couple of pages of the book and then goes and starts from the beginning. And, yeah, and I'm like, to a lot of writers, it's like, that's crazy. Like, like the whole point is that I put all these words in this order for a reason, like to lead you to this, whatever. But they're like, nope, don't trust you, don't trust, whatever. Um, I mean, one of the things that is you see this argument erupt on about romance online constantly is there's always somebody, often a man, who's like, well, why can't I write a romance that has a tragic ending? Because then it is not a romance. The definition of romance includes the happy ending. And if you want to write a tragic love story, that is labeled a tragic love story. Do not say, "Oh, I want to get a whole bunch of that sweet romance money from romance readers." That'd be like, "Oh, vegan food is really great, but all I have is this cow. I'm going to rebrand it as if it's, whatever and feed it to people anyway." It's like you would never do that, right? So why would you take your, you know, whatever, your literary tragedy and try to pretend that it's not what it is, And it's like, this is the thing. People who read actually pay attention to what is in books. It's like you're not going to put one over on them. You're going to get a lot of one-star reviews, in the same way if you opened a pizza restaurant and then what you served was not in fact pizza, you would get a lot of one-star reviews of people being like, the sign says pizza. We did not get pizza. It was pretty good sushi, but we're not here for sushi. Like, do you know what I mean? Like if you walked into a place that had red and white checkered tablecloths and a bottle of Chianti on, whatever, and, blah, 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 and then they put a platter of sushi down in front of you, you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. So it's like, okay, maybe if you're there for the offbeat postmodern experience, fine, but that's not most readers, most
I
browsers.
remember clearly of being told to, in my story for Silk Threads, do
Mhm.
not kill the main character
Right,
or
do not kill the main character.
do not kill the main character and they can't be eaten.
Right, it can't be eaten.
But there were plenty of ninjas, essentially red shirts, that
Right, they can get killed. Secondary characters can get killed, so forth and so on. But yeah, but no, your main couple, they have to live to the end and they have to get together at the end, right? They can't be like, that was fun, bye.
yeah.
It's like, nope, that's not a romance either.
Oh, let's
Uh,
see. My two main characters ended up having supernatural aerial sex,
uh-huh, yep, yep,
fucking
yep.
in the sky while flying.
Why the hell not? I mean, um, like I said, it's fantasy. And this is the thing is that because fantasy creates empathy, because fiction creates empathy, um, fiction can be used as a therapeutic tool. And this is one of the things about YA fiction, which I do not write, mostly because I've been too busy, and I obviously I write the opposite. I write adult with a capital A fiction, right?
Define
Um,
YA for
but
folks.
but YA exists to introduce adult concepts to young readers,
Mhm.
right? So these concepts of dating and sexuality and and dealing with war and trauma and whatnot, right, are essentially the genre exists specifically to introduce young readers to these adult concepts, right? And the way YA works is people are always reading about the protagonists who are older than themselves. So, the 10, 11, 12-year-olds are reading about the 14-year-old protagonists, and the 14, 15, 16-year-olds are reading about the 17 and 18-year-old protagonists. And now we have, of course, 18 and 19-year-olds who are reading about what we call new adult, which where they're like 19, 20, 21, college freshmen through, whatever, like that age. That's sort of a new category that didn't used to exist. But it's like,
Mm.
but the reason for it is, uh, kids and adults self-medicate by reading. Um, and when there's something that you're afraid of or something that traumatizes you, reading about it where you have the safety to just close the book at any time is a way to do it, right? And this is one of the so I was a fraidy cat as a kid. I know nobody believes this, right? Because they're like, you're like the most fearless person we know. And I'm like, but I was afraid of imaginary things. I was not afraid of real things. I was not afraid of talking to adults or jumping in the pool or doing like real life things. Okay, I was afraid the house would burn down, but I was not afraid of fire itself, right? I was not afraid of real world things, and I was not afraid of a lot of stuff that other kids are afraid of, right? I was afraid of things like giant germs might come through the wall and eat us. I was afraid of Godzilla, right? I was convinced Godzilla was real and was going to step on our house, that kind of thing. And I would be like terrified, like unable to go to sleep at night. And my parents went on a campaign at one point and of course I love Godzilla now, right? And my parents went on a campaign to try to get me to sleep at night by trying to cut off my access to scary things, right? Um, because I had such a vivid imagination, right, that I would scare myself into not being able to sleep. Um, and and it did not work. It did not work. Everything that they tried to do to be like, oh, that's not real. You imagined that, whatever. But then like fire, it's like fire is real, And they finally talked to a child psychologist that said, actually, what your daughter probably needs is to desensitize herself. So don't tell her not to watch the Godzilla movies. Tell her to watch them more. Right. And of course, this was at the time when like we didn't have a VCR or any of that kind of thing. So you had to wait for them to come on like Channel 9, it's like they were on Saturday mornings at like unpredictable times and stuff. And it's like, whatever. But reading the comic books, I think my dad eventually bought me a Godzilla comic book and I just read it over and over and over. I now know that that's exactly what I was doing is I was desensitizing myself to the thing that I was afraid of. And then I was no longer afraid of it. Right? And it's like, oh, you know, um, and that's what the whole YA genre exists to do, right? And so I by labeling something and saying, this fiction has, consensual non-consent or these particular fetishes or whatever in it, anyone who's afraid of that thing or is like I don't like that thing, or I always avoid that thing but maybe I kind of like that thing, because that's the thing is that sometimes the thing that you are the most averse to, it turns out it's because it actually does scratch some itch for you or turn you on in some way, and the next thing you know you're like, oh, actually now I like that thing. So um, I feel like more labeling gives people more freedom. It gives them more freedom to choose for themselves if they want to eat the spicy food or not, right? And we know plenty of people who taught themselves to eat spicy food by doing it gradually, and then eventually they're like, ah, I can't get enough sriracha, and whatever. Um, but say it's sort of the same thing, right? So now I like labeling. And also having been in the fanfic world for, now a couple of decades, the thing is, warnings are also enticements, right? So that same list of things that you're like, oh no, I don't want this, that, the other. Other people are like, that is what I'm looking for. You know, I'm looking for Lucius Harry non-consent, like or whatever, or what are some of the the TV show Supernatural where the two characters are brothers, right? And it's like there's tons of people who write what they call it Wincest, right? Because it's the Winchester brothers, and it's like there's tons of people who write these two characters together, in smutty fanfic, and that they even made fun of it on the show, where the two characters are like, I can't remember exactly how it worked, but they were looking at a thing and one of them says, "Yeah, they know we're brothers, right?" And it's like but it's a fantasy. They're two fictional characters who, whatever. And then I don't know. It's not one of my ships, so in fact, I never watched the show. Everything I know about Supernatural, I know from reading Supernatural fan fiction. You know, but yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like I just, there was a wellspring of erotic energy out of women all over the world. I was here for it, right? I'm here to see what they're up to. And when I say women, I don't actually mean women. I mean all kinds of people, but the fanfic world is very, very female dominated. Um it is a largely women and queer people space, queer people of whatever gender. Um
Yeah,
Hi.
I've heard that it's a very queer space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the tragedy about what has happened with, say, Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling becoming this, you know, complete raving, trans exclusive radical feminist, where she's literally pouring millions of dollars into making sure that anti-trans legislation gets passed in the UK. Like this is not just, and she gloats about it openly, where she's like, I'm taking all those royalties and I'm spending it on ruining your life, that kind of thing. She fights with people on the internet saying things like this. And you're just like, oh gosh. And I mean, Harry Potter fandom was the most trans-led, trans-forward fandom I was ever in, you know, like, yeah. So just, I don't know. Um, Sorry, the tail is right in the camera now. He's like, "You're ranting, Mom. Get back on topic." Okay, thanks, Earl Grey. Um, Hi. Yeah. He's like, "Why are
So
you?"
I'm going to take the Earl Grey pause for a moment and check in with our live guests and
Mm.
attendees of any thoughts, questions, or reflections so far. Somebody wrote that I think sometimes people find a way to make the labels fun or
Fun or
interesting,
interesting? Yeah. Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
that helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
An
Yeah. Yeah.
immediate list, yeah, as opposed to a warning label. So
Right.
I welcome any of the questions, and if anyone wants to come on live in the voice, I think I'm able to do that. But yeah, where do you want to see consent go in fiction literature?
Um, I want to see more of people modeling consent in their fiction.
Mhm.
Um, and and romance does this pretty well because romance is all about them negotiating the boundaries of their relationship and, peeling back the layers and him having to confess his true feelings and, et cetera, et cetera. And this is true in queer romance also, by the way. There's, you know,
I
but
get the sense that a lot of romance is actually communication porn. Like,
communication porn is a really good word for it. And that's because people,
oh,
right? We're
somebody
talking
killed
about
someone.
we're talking about wish fulfillment, right? And it's like if what people really wanted is a relationship where they actually worked out their shit, right? It's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so many people, that's what they really want, and they just don't feel like they're getting it in their real life, right? Or at least not right now.
Now
So
there's
yeah,
the
yeah,
genre,
yeah. But I'd love to see it in more in other
communication.
genres. Like I'd love to see relationship boundaries being discussed and worked out. I'd like to see the safe sex conversation happen more naturally in more kinds of fiction. Um, it can be very hot. I mean, as we know in real life, it can be very hot. It can also be awkward and, goofy sometimes, but that's fine, right? It's like,
Okay, so I am behind on my romance fiction because I've kind of been busy. Um,
mm-hmm,
and smut fiction, because I keep going back to my favorite oldies, because we do.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Um, have there been any fiction either in the smut, erotica, or romance genre where the characters are negotiating for a
Mhm.
consensual non-consent scene that then happens?
I'm sure there are. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are people who are doing it, and I haven't kept up with some of my favorite kink writers, but people like Charisse Sinclair and Tiffany Rice. Rice is Reissz. She's actually writing now as Meg Schaefer a lot, but she has a whole series. um the called The Original Sinners, um where like the main pairing is like a kinky priest and a just yeah, it's you can look them up. And
Actually,
it's like
where we're on this roll,
mhm.
tell us about your recommended or favorite writers who handle consent in ways that you find exciting.
Um, so there's a lot of science fiction writers right now who are doing it, who are just I'll call it modeling, right? Who are just modeling the society the way they want to see it happen, right? Who are have people using their pronouns, really naturally, who have, just I mean things like that. So like Charlie Jane Anders, you know, just you'll have people will walk in, introduce themselves and their pronouns. Everyone will respect their pronouns. End of end of discussion, right? They like it's not like a plot point or something. It's just this is how we do it in this society, and there it goes, right? So, um, or you know, the actually, actually, it's sitting right here. Um, this is Annalee Newitz's Automatic Noodle.
Mm.
You would like this book. Uh, Set in San
That
Francisco. It's set in a future San Francisco where California has fought a war of independence against the United States, and has given robots some rights. And so some
I
robots decide to start their own noodle restaurant.
I feel
Um,
like I know Annalie from previous San Francisco, yeah,
I'm
and that
I'm sure you,
book,
yeah.
yeah.
So
Can you pull that up again for the
sure,
screen?
it's called Automatic Noodle.
Okay, all
And
right.
sorry, I've
And
got some kind of my light doesn't like this book cover for some reason. It's like it's got
do you
a
consider that genre?
yeah. So this is science fiction for sure.
All right,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's like it's a pretty short book, but it's really jam-packed with just like I don't know, discussion of like, yeah, what does it mean to have human rights if you're not human and stuff like that. Just and that whole idea of like, well, we give some rights to some people, but we don't give them all the rights because we reserve the right to take those rights away, right? And so it's really an interesting conversation to be having right now where we have an administration right now who are essentially like, illegal immigrants have no rights. And then the next thing is immigrants have no rights. And then it's like, and the children of immigrants have no rights. And, this is the
Mhm.
road we're going down, right? So, to see it from a robot's point of view is really is interesting because of course science fiction lets us divorce ourselves from our modern political reality a little bit and think about things without getting bogged down and thinking about the actual details of what's going on in the world around us because there's 100 details, right? But it's like in a story, you can focus on, a
There's
smaller
a
number.
question in the chat from
Mhm.
someone. Is there a covenant a writer enters into with readers? And if so, in your opinion, what is it?
So we literally call it the contract with the reader. Especially when you're a professional writer, essentially, you have a contract with the reader, um, that your genre determines essentially what the payoff should be, right? So if it's a romance, you have promised by putting it on the romance shelf that a that there will be a happy ending and that I make you no other promises. They're going to go through hell to get there, right? So, there's going to be suffering, there's going to be, whatever. That's also part of the contract, but I have promised you that, yeah, I'm going to tie you up and put you through hell, but then but I'm going to get you off in the end, right? Essentially, in a mystery, the mystery will be solved, right? In a high fantasy, uh goodwill will win over evil. Um, in any kind of political science fiction, the status quo will be upended. Things like that. So every genre has a winning condition essentially, and the readers expect it. Now, if what you're writing is literary fiction, which I said earlier was the genre which claims it's not a genre, then what you are telling the reader is, I make you no promises, right? That's why it's the genre that claims it's not a genre. It's like, I am going to be thought-provoking and I'm going to maybe be difficult to read, or I'm going to provoke your brain in a lot of different directions, but I make you no promises at all about whether anyone lives or dies, or, whether there's even a plot happens, right? Maybe there is no plot. Maybe this is just a series of vignettes, right? You don't know. And so, when you go into a literary work, you're like, all right, fine. Either I'm here for that or I'm not. So, and if you're not, then don't buy stuff off that shelf, right? Um, so yeah, yeah. So there is a contract between the writer and the reader. And then if you're not a professional writer and you're writing fanfic or whatever, then it really depends. I mean, but this is why fanfic has such a well-developed uh set of practices for tagging and, you know, whatnot, so that not only can people avoid the things they don't want to see, they can find the things they do want to see. And then, because that's not about commerce, that's entirely about attention, right? And it's like the stories that are really good, people will tell their friends to go and read them. And, the I went just to see what was the most read original fiction on AO3 recently. AO3 is the Archive of Our Own, which is a big nonprofit fanfic archive, where everything you can read is free. There is some stuff you cannot read unless you have logged in, because people can choose to keep their stuff sort of behind the wall. But it's not a paywall; it's just an identity wall, let's call it. But if you have an email address, you can have an AO3 account, right? Um, and people don't just post fan fiction there. Some of them post original, what they call original fic, where you made up the characters in the world yourself, right? And um, the story, I can't remember if I was looking specifically for male, whatever, that has the most reads. It's like 3.5 million reads, right? Um, and it's about a guy and a dragon. Um, and it's called, what is it called? Damn it, I've forgotten the name of it. It's it's like For Whom the Bell Tolls, but not that. It actually, maybe that is what it's called. Like it's like the title didn't really have that much to do with the plot as far as I'm concerned, but it's like, yeah, it's like, a dragon comes to town, and one guy who's a kind of nerdy, keep to himself Smith, goes out to meet the dragon in the field because he's like, everyone in town is freaking out about you, and I just came to see for myself what's up. And the dragon is like, you'll do. And he grabs him and takes him off to his mountain lair, whatever. And he's like, I can't wait till the villagers come to rescue you. And he's like, I hate to break it to you. The villagers are not going to come to rescue me. Nobody cares about me. They're just happy that you've left. Right. And the dragon is basically like, well, it just like hijinks ensue basically from there, where the two of them are sort of stuck with each other. And, and it's like, and, just, and can a man and a dragon work it out and fall in love? And yes, they can, apparently. And it's a really sweet, and then in the end they have sex, so um it's just, yeah. So it's super, yes. For Whom the Bell, Belle, tolls is something else. um but yes, that is something else. The book, the fanfic I'm thinking of is a title that is constructed like that, but I can't think of what it is at the moment. Um, I put it in the Wanton Weekly actually the other day. This is how I found it, is that somebody was basically like, what's the most read fanfic ever on, non-fanfic on AO3? And I'm like, oh, let's put it in the WW. So I have a weekly newsletter called the Wanton Weekly, which is just a writers who publish erotic fiction on the internet, and it can't be like ebooks that are for sale on Amazon. They have to be like posted in your Patreon or posted on a blog, or on one of these sites, Literotica, Theo, etc. For those of you who haven't seen theoreads.com, that's where I'm posting a bunch of my stuff. Me and Sinclair Sexsmith and Lauren Burka and a bunch of kinky writers are all there, and Titus Androgynous, and it's a fairly new erotica site.
What's
um it's called Theo Reads, the O reads, right? So um and the but yeah, so the WW, it's at, if you Google Wanton Weekly, you'll find it. It's a free newsletter. You can get on the mailing list for it. And so, yeah, writers basically submit links to their fiction, and then I compile them once a week and email them to people.
Great.
Um, and it's fun. And yeah, Theo is killing it as far as really great quality stuff to read online. And they basically were like, Wattpad has not had a new innovation in years. Radish is dead.
Remember, I opened this conversation with you being my enabler.
Yeah. Hmm.
Here you go again. Here you go again.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Okay. Oh my God. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, enabler. And
Uh-huh.
yeah.
There's
We
a lot of,
just
there's a lot of really great erotic fiction being written out there right now. And this is the thing is that, and you've got people who are just posting it on their own blogs and whatever because they're like, I don't know, what I write isn't like, doesn't fit an Amazon category or doesn't, whatever. Publishers are not interested or the government might be coming to lock up all the pornographers. Maybe I should keep just under a pen name and, whatever. Right? It's like, so, but people are out there writing it and reading it and getting off. So, yeah. So yeah, I don't run a publishing house anymore, but I still do what I can essentially to keep spreading the word about great smutty writers. I mean,
bless you. Now we just got 5 minutes left, and
I told you 90 minutes was going to fly by, right?
and my usual viewers of Consent Dojo, you know that I ask my guests for a homework or a thought exercise for us. Do you have a homework for us?
All right, here my homework is, have you ever been criticized for a sexual fantasy of yours? Has someone tried to tell you that your fantasy is harmful to them or to their community or to your community? How did you handle it, and how would you handle it now if someone was going to say that to you today?
Mm,
Um, and yes, I've had lots of people basically be like, the reason women don't have rights is because you write about smut. And it's like,
what?
Yeah, yeah.
Wait,
eh,
huh?
I'm telling you, there are people who believe that if women would just shut up and do what men told them, then then they wouldn't need to be oppressed anymore. Right. Yeah, I know. Look at your face. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 So I've had people tell me that like, oh, yeah, your rape fantasies are what encourage men to oppress women, and if you didn't do that, then like women would get liberated faster. And I'm like, women will not be liberated, queer people will not be liberated, trans people will not be liberated until our sexual fantasies are liberated, right? Ah, to the victor go the spoils. Yes, that's it by Suzuki Blue. That is the one. Um, and yes,
Oh,
and if you don't know what alpha, beta, omega is, um, that's a whole that's a whole nother 90 minutes of but it's a I Google it. It's a whole world of fanfic unto itself where there are essentially that comes sort of from the world of like the idea that werewolves have like alpha and beta wolves, and then there are the omegas, the and that they go in alphas and omegas go into heat and they do whatever. And yeah, so anyway, um
um, I would be happy to have you on my Patreon to talk
yeah.
about because I'm like, what?
I did, yeah. ABO is one of the things I do not write, but there are lots of people who do, and it's escaped out into the world now where there are original fic ABO, whatever. It's just a trope
Okay,
like
okay,
like
okay.
any other, and whatnot. So in fact there was a big scandal a couple of years ago where two ABO authors were suing each other for like copyright infringement and whatever, and it's like neither of them made up the concept, so it was kind of a little bit like
I'm gonna
is
pull us
this just
back. I'm gonna pull
yeah,
us back to your homework.
yeah. Hmm.
And so I will also put that in the show notes. And in the last few minutes here, tell us what you're up to and where we're going to find your stuff and what's the latest.
All right, the latest is so the book that just went live for pre-order on Amazon today is called Bound by the Blood. This is the paranormal sex magic BDSM urban fantasy thriller that I've been talking about since literally when Obama was president. It was originally contracted at Tor Books, and then various shenanigans happened at Tor. That my editor was slow, then whatever. Then she got fired. Then the new editor took 2 years to read it. On and on. The end result was that Tor gave it back to me, and so I'm publishing it for myself. I'm currently serializing it on Patreon, where I'm putting up one chapter a week. So for as low as $2 a month, you can come along the ride with the rest of us. And then yeah, so and I'm starting to recruit reviewers and readers essentially. So reviewers, people who are like, I will promise to read an ebook copy in advance and then post a review in January when the book goes live. So I'm starting to build up that team. So anyone who's interested in that, yeah, drop me a note. I'm easy to find. Well, though, like I said, my website is a little bit broken at the moment because I'm
All the links are in the
still fixing
comment
it. But
section
yes, but
and the
but you
U.
can find me pretty easily. And yeah, my email is out there. I'm ctan.writer@gmail.com. I'm very, very easy to find. People are like, why don't you write under a pen name? And I'm like, I just can't be bothered.
Mm, good, good. Well, uh, stick around a bit for those of you who are here live. That's you too, Cecilia. And I want to close out the recording. So, Consent Dojo. Let's all go out there and think about fantasy versus reality. Have hot fantasies, and read a lot. Support these writers, and as we go along, continue to build your consent muscles because it is an everyday exercise. And speaking of our Patreon supporters, I want to really, really thank the Patreon supporters and my subscribers because you are the ones that allow me to do these projects that are made free to the world. And you supporting me and reading my stuff and showing up to office hours, all of that make this possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you.